So my name is Allie, and today I'm going to be talking about my experience rereading a certain book called Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. So I reread this particular book about a year ago, and the first time I read it, I absolutely loved it. I think I either gave it a 4 or 5 star rating. I was really obsessed with the series. Like, I read the series pretty quickly, basically one right after the other. I read both Heir of Fire and Crown of Midnight on ebook, and then I read Queen of Shadows, which is right over there, and I read that in my physical copy, and then I read half of Empire Storms. So that's basically my first experience reading this series, and the first time I read this book, I really enjoyed it. Either 4 or 5 stars, like I said, and I didn't really think too much about this book because honestly, I was just kind of like, it's a really great fantasy, I really enjoyed it, but I ended up actually liking the other books a little bit more until I got to Empire Storms, and then I kind of was falling off of the train a little bit. So basically, the reason I decided to reread this book is because I had all these Sarah J. Maas books and I didn't really know what to do with them. I had unhauled them, but they were just kind of sitting in my room, like doing nothing, having no purpose. So I was like, I think I'm going to reread this book. So I just picked it back up and I got some tabs, which as you can see, I did tab it up quite a bit. And I decided I am going to reread this book and I'm going to annotate it and I'm going to think critically about it and I'm going to see if I feel the same way I did last year or if my emotions and feelings about this book have changed. So since I read this series for the first time last year, my feelings, even without rereading this book, have obviously changed. I still do really appreciate the series for kind of like pulling me in and making me really interested in this series, and I really do appreciate Sarah J. Maas's writing for the most part. I'd say about 95% of the time I really enjoy her writing. The other 5% is when she talks about sex, so that's kind of like where I'm not too sure about her writing. I don't mind sex in books, but the way that Sarah J. Maas does it, not a big fan. But that's kind of beside the point because there's really no sex in this book. So basically, I have kind of fallen off of this train because of the issues with her books, the lack of representation within her books, and that's about it. Like, otherwise, I feel like if this did have the proper representation, I would still really love this series and I wouldn't have any issues with it. I would probably still be reading it. I'd probably be reading Kingdom of Ash right now, but unfortunately, I don't think that I'm ever going to get to that book, and that's mainly because of the lack of diversity. And that's just something that I can't really get past. Like, I wish that I could. I wish that I had the ability, or I wish I had the privilege to kind of just look past that and be like, it doesn't matter to me because I'm already represented in this book, but I'm not represented in this book and I can't exist in her world. So it's kind of like, can't really enjoy it as much as I normally would. So yeah, that's about it. So that's kind of like all of my background thoughts before jumping into this reread. I wanted to go in with a really open mind. I didn't want to kind of, you know, bring in too much baggage of any of the drama or any of my thoughts about the lack of diversity, because in this book we do have one person of color. So the diversity is a little okay, but it's not great. I'm gonna go into that later, but yeah, so we do have one person of color in this book, that's Nehemia. But this book specifically is about Selena Sardothian, and she is being taken from these prison camps, and she's going to go in to compete to be the King's Champion. So that is all of her goal. That's just basically what she's doing at the castle. It's kind of a weak plot now that I've like reread it. Like, the first time I read it, I'm like, oh, this is so cool. It's kind of like the Hunger Games and it's really interesting and I love the plot. But then like the second time I've read it, it's just like the plot is so weak. Like that whole champion thing is just so weak, because they even say in this book that it's clear and it's obvious that Selena is going to be one of the bottom 2, or like the last 2 in like the whole champion thing. And so I'm like, if if everyone is just so certain that Selena is going to get to the bottom two and it's going to be her and this other guy, then what's the whole point of the plot? Like, that was just, I think that's like my first issue with this, which is so funny because it kind of happens later on in the book, so it's not like the first thing that happens, but they do mention it, you know, at some point where it's like, we all know that Selena is going to be in the bottom two, so really is it that big of a deal that she's doing this? Like, is there any point to doing this? And I would say not really. Okay, so I found the quote where it kind of calls itself out, like the book. I say, this book literally calls out itself like that whole plot is useless. And the quote is, "It was clear Kane and Selena would ultimately face each other. And until then, well, the other champions weren't worth his time." And I'm pretty sure this is Kale talking. I'm pretty sure. Or it's Dorian. It might be Dorian. I think it's Dorian that's saying that in his head. In his inner monologue, that's what he's saying, is that it was clear Kane and Selena would ultimately face each other, and until then, well, the other champions weren't worth his time. So he's basically saying that we all know that Kane and Selena are going to end up being the last two to fight each other, and it's going to be between them. So all the other champions are like irrelevant, basically. So I'm just like, why? So like, I'm like, couldn't, I feel like the whole champion plot is just a little irrelevant, a little like miscellaneous, a little, what is that word? Extraneous? Yeah. I feel like it's a little extraneous because it just doesn't seem to like matter too much. Like, it just seems to be the reason she's at the palace. Like, I feel like Sarah J Maas needed a reason for Selena to be there, and so she was just like, let's just have this champion thing and it's gonna be like no big deal because like we all know this lady's gonna win. So yeah. So really there's no like, I feel like there's no urgency. There's no huge like reason why she like desperately needs to like win this, because we all know she's gonna win it. So what's the point? But yeah, I probably should talk a little bit about like the colors and stuff. So like a pink tab was for the boys, so either Dorian or Kale. Orange was for anything for Selena. Blue was anything about magic. Purple was anything funny. And I think green, I'm not really sure what green was. Oh, green, wait, was green anything that had to do with glass castles or like any, like, no, green was like any like interesting plot stuff. So those were all of like the ones that I used. Weird. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah. Something that I really noticed about this book, and something I didn't really care about or didn't bother me the first time I read it, but it seemed to bother other people, like from reviews that I've read, is that Selena talks a lot about being Adderlin's assassin, and like she's this like big tough assassin. She kills all these people. She's so violent and tough and whatever, but it's never really shown. It's just told to us. Like, we're just like, so many times we're told she's Adderlin's assassin, she's the toughest assassin, she's heartless, she whatever, and you never really get to see that. Like, she doesn't really fight anyone until like the very end when she's fighting Kane, and even then she's not that great, you know, she's kind of getting beaten. I don't want to like spoil anything, but like, I mean, if you're watching this video, you've probably read this book. You know, who hasn't read this book? So, you know, she really gets help from Nehemia and stuff like that. So did she really beat him herself? Kind of, I guess, because like it brought out her, whatever, it brought out her magic. I guess she did, but like she still needed help with that. So it's just like, is she really Adderlin's assassin? Is she really the most ruthless assassin when we are not shown that at all in this entire book? Like, it takes like, I think, until the next two books to like actually be like, oh, I get it, she's an assassin, that's great. But in this book, it's just told to us, it's spoon-fed to us. It's not really like something we get to actually see in action, which I feel like is kind of a big no-no. Like, we're told a lot to show instead of tell, and this book does a whole lot of telling. It does a whole lot of telling. Like, it's so rarely that this book actually shows us anything. It's a lot of just like background information that like of course has to happen because she wants to set up the plot for the next like 700 books. So I get it. Like, we have to go through the plot. She has to tell us some things, and I'm totally fine with that. I'm not like a hard ass with the like show don't tell, because like I do a lot of like telling as well. So I'm totally, I get it. But I feel like this book really should have done a little bit more showing and not as much telling. I feel like if she hadn't been so adamant with like the champion plot, I feel like we could have probably explored some of her Adderlan's assassin thing, and that would have been really cool. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Adderlan? I don't know. I really don't know how to say any freaking word in this book. It's I don't know, who knows. So some of the funny things that I pointed out that aren't like criticisms or anything, because I did find a lot of just funny little parts that I enjoyed, that I thought were charming or interesting, and a lot of it has to do with like the relationship between Dorian and Cale, because it's so interesting, and I think it's such an enriching and powerful relationship, like, because it's such a strong friendship, and I think that that's something that gets kind of lost in a lot of YA books, is like the friendship, especially between the two love interests, and like how that's kind of complex, especially when you throw in Celaena Sardothian. But like, I feel like that that's such an interesting part of Throne of Glass, is how close Cale and Dorian are. Like, I don't think I really noticed that the first time around, because I didn't know what to look for. I didn't really know Cale and Dorian like I do now after reading, what, like 4.5 books? So I feel like pointing out a lot of their like friendship and some of the friendship troubles that Celaena brings with her is just really interesting. Like, this quote I wrote, "Dang, trouble, trouble, trouble," and the quote is, "It must be exceptionally awful to be you today. I bet all the ladies were begging you to protect them from the murderer inside our walls." Cale grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. And he's talking to Dorian. And I love that, because you can really just see the way that like their relationship is normally, their friendship is normally, and how things have kind of changed throughout the course of this book. Like, we're about halfway through the book and their friendship is kind of shifted, and I think that their friendship and their dynamic is so much more interesting than anything Celaena brings to the table, which is just sad, because I feel like Celaena is such like a one-track character in this book, unfortunately, and I feel like she kind of repeats herself a lot. She is, like, when I say one-track minded, it's just her being Adderlan's assassin. She's ruthless, she's a killer, and that's it. That's all she thinks about. Sometimes she'll think about the boys, but it's really actually not that present in this book, surprisingly. I did think that, like, looking back, I thought that the romance had been a little bit more present in this book, but it's not. The romance is kind of a fairly small subplot in this book, which is nice, but it's also kind of not great, because Celaena isn't that strong of a character in this specific book. I feel like she definitely does get stronger in the other books. Like, I feel like she has a stronger voice, especially in Queen of Shadows, which is my favorite book of the series. But I feel like in this book, she just doesn't have that strong of a voice. Also, something funny that I just pointed out a lot was how straight-laced Cale is. I really love that, how, like, through the course of this book, it's not like his walls are completely broken down, but they're broken down, like, you know, throughout the book. It's minimal, but it's there. And I love this conversation between Celaena and Cale. And it's, "Are you going to the temple?" That's Cale. "I'm allowed to go to temple, but not to feast." She took a spoonful of the porridge. "Religious observances shouldn't be denied to anyone." That's Cale. And Celaena goes, "And the feast is," and Cale goes, "a show of debauchery." And I just loved that. I loved it so much. I said Cale is so straight-laced in my comments. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. That's what the comments look like. But yeah, I just really loved that side of Cale. And also, I love this line. This is in Celaena's head. "Oh, she loved porridge." There are some little things that Celaena thinks about that are just so funny, because she's so sarcastic and dry, and I think that's like my favorite thing about Celaena, is her humor. She has a great sense of humor, and I relate to that. So funny. I love also Dorian's sense of humor. I pointed that out a lot in this book, is that Dorian has a great sense of humor, and he really is the one to kind of bring some lightness in every once in a while when it's needed. needed, and I appreciate that because it's needed a lot of times, because sometimes it'll get a little slow or it'll get a little dark, and I'm just like, I need some of Dorian's really great you know, sense of humor. It's just, it's great. Another little conversation I love between Kale and Selena is it goes, "Idiot," she said, grinning now. "Crazed criminal," he returned, grinning too. "I really do hate you. At least I didn't come in 18th place," he said. Oh my gosh, the tea. That was just some tea, piping hot. I love that. She literally got so burned right there. "At least I didn't come in 18th place." Oh, I love that. That was just like one of my favorite parts. My notes here say, "Oh, the bants." I love the bants right there. Yeah, I mean, like, there are so many pages of just like so many notes, so many underlines. It's just, it's wow. Wow. I was really surprised that I had so much to say about this book. If you can see that, just so much to say about it. It's like, I didn't think that I had that many thoughts or opinions about this book, but I guess I do. There were some of like Dorian's arrogance in this book that I wasn't super keen on. And I underlined this quote that said, where he says, "Aloud, again, I'm a prince. I can do what I like." And my note right next to it is, "Oh, barf." So yeah, like, wow, it's just, and there are so many moments where Dorian is just like, the hots for Selena is just through the roof. He has the hots for her, and he is never going to not think about it. Like, every time he sees her almost, it's like, look at her body, and she's so beautiful, and I want to have sex with her. That's basically the subtext, but I underlined this, and it says, "She was a surprisingly average height." What does that mean? I don't understand what surprisingly average height means. Like, did he expect her to be taller? Did he expect her to be shorter? Like, I really don't understand. And we're also like almost halfway through the book, so he's seen Selena multiple times by now. Like, I don't understand that. He glanced down at her form. Average height aside, her curves were enticing. Oh my god, I hate that quote so much. Basically, I said, dude, chill for 2 seconds. Your dick is not that important. And I stand by that 100%. Also, my other note on this same page is, she still has yet to prove how good of an assassin she is. Because I underlined, he wondered at her discomfort as she turned red. It seemed far too human an emotion for Adderlin's assassin. I'm like, where's Adderlin's assassin? I don't see her. She's not here. I don't know, call back another time. Dorian and Selena just have like the dumbest conversations. Like, he's like, "I don't think anyone who plays like that can be just a criminal. It seems like you have a soul," he teased. And she's like, "Of course I have a soul. Everyone has a soul." And that's another thing I pointed out as well, is that Sarah J Maas loves to repeat things for emphasis. And if you know that reference, the
podular. I repeat things for emphasis. Emphasis!
She does it quite a lot. I am pretty sure I put those in my notes quite a bit. Here's some repetition. She says, "the king" 3 times in the span of about 3 lines. And my note is more repetition, so there must be quite a bit of repetition. I mean, there really is. It's something that I noted quite a lot, is that just another note I put is big repetition, big repetition. Ooh, he got big repetitions. It's just so much repetition. Books and books and books and books. It's just like, what? There's just so much repetition in this book. I'm just like, why? Why is there a need for so much repetition? I don't understand. I think we get it by now, Sarah J Maas. We get it. Lots of repetition. You're trying to emphasize stuff. Oh, here's a good one. I mentioned Selena's color changing eyes quite a bit. It's not mentioned a lot in this book. It is just mentioned once. And it says, "At a passing glance, one might think her eyes blue or gray, perhaps even green," so that's 3 colors, "depending on the color of her clothing. So her eyes change between blue, gray, or green depending on the clothing that she wears, because somehow her eyes are like a mood ring. I don't know, like maybe. I really don't know anyone who has eyes that can be anywhere from gray to green. That seems like a pretty big range. Yeah, I don't buy that. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. And I said, gag. Color changing eyes, how magical. And then another one here somewhere, I say, this is when Kale is talking to Selena somewhere around page 100. And he says he hadn't slept well since they'd taken her out of Endovier. And my joking note here is, now his thoughts are consumed with thoughts of her color-changing eyes, lol, which is kind of repetitive on my part, thoughts and thoughts, but whatever. Basically, he can't stop thinking about her color-changing eyes. It's a problem. It's an issue for Kale. So yeah, I love that. I just think it's so funny that her eyes can change colors. She's a chameleon. She is wonderful. She is so magical. I think my last criticism for this book, besides like the whole Nehemia thing, is the lack of real feminism in this book. There's so much girl hate in this book, like so much. I don't even know if I could point out every single instance to you guys, because there is so much girl hate. And this is just one line. This is probably one of the first instances of it. And this is Selena, and she says, I hate women like that. They're so desperate for the attention of men that they'd willingly betray and harm members of their own sex, and we claim men cannot think with their brains. At least men are direct about it. And that quote rubbed me the wrong way. And I got really mad because I like a certain book. It's called Stalking Jack the Ripper. And people like to talk shit about that feminism in that book, which is much better than this feminism. It's not girl hating. There's no put downs of women. And Audrey Rose is very understanding of the position that women are in, especially women who kind of go with the flow of the patriarchy. She understands that they have really no choice in whether they can or can't do that. A lot of them are beholden to their fathers or their brothers or their husbands or whoever, and she understands that and she doesn't hold that against them. And there's also a lot of Audrey Rose protecting and defending women who end up being sex workers, and she is always the one to put down any like negativity towards sex workers. And somehow that feminism isn't good enough for people, but then this feminism is good enough. There's so much girl hate in this book. Selena literally hates women. She hates them, literally, unless they're just like she is, unless they're like badass assassins, or they're really tough, or they can like wield a weapon. Unless they're like that, Selena thinks the women are useless, basically. And I'm just like, are we really gonna pretend that this book is freaking feminist? Like, just because Selena is like tough and she's like an assassin, we're gonna pretend that this is feminist. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna pretend, okay. I wanted to clear that up. I wanted to like make sure that everyone was on the same page, that there's a lot of girl hate in this book and somehow that's feminist. I don't know how girl hate is feminist, but according to people, it is. I thought it wasn't. Maybe I just got the wrong memo. I don't know, but yeah, so so yeah, I think my last comments about this book are gonna be towards Nehemia. Not necessarily towards Nehemia, but towards Selena, because in this book, Selena is extremely distrustful of Nehemia because of where she comes from and because of the things that are said about Nehemia. And for some reason that makes her not trustworthy, even though Nehemia has shown nothing but being trustworthy and being helpful and being her friend. And yet Selena starts to think that Nehemia has something to do with all the murders, and I hate that plot. I don't like it, because we all know Nehemia is not like that. Like, why is it the only person of color is the one that gets targeted for being the person behind the murderers? Like, that's cringe AF. Like, I don't condone that. I don't like it. It rubs me the wrong way that Selena is constantly wary of Nehemia and thinks that she's sneaky, and I just don't like that. It's just too many just bad stereotypes, and oh, I just don't like it. I really don't. And I don't like the whole slavery thing. It just rubs me the wrong way, so I'm really sorry. But overall, like I said, I mean, what are you gonna do? Like, the representation of this book is crap, or basically non-existent, and that's something that Sarah J Maas has to work on, and I hope that she does work on it, and I hope that her next books, whatever she ends up putting out, are much more representative of the diversity in the world. And I just, yeah, she needs to do a lot better. I hope that she can talk to some people, talk to some beta readers or sensitivity readers, and I think that'd be really helpful for her because she needs a lot of that help. And anyway, so that's just kind of like all of my thoughts on this book. I mean, not all of them. There's definitely some things I didn't touch on, but those are kind of like minor things. And yeah, so I think overall I'd probably give this book a 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't hate it. It was really fun to get to reread again, but there's just so many things that I had an issue with. It's hard for me to give it anything over 3 stars, and I feel like I don't think that's being generous. I think that's actually genuinely the rating I would give it. I actually took down all of my ratings for these books. All of my reviews are still up, but my ratings are gone. So I'm not going to rate this book. I don't feel the need to rate it. There are so many other people who have rated it. My rating is kind of null and void. So yeah, that's just kind of all of my thoughts on this book. This ended up being such a longer video than I expected it to be, but what are you gonna do? I needed to talk about Throne of Glass. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, then go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you have any sort of thoughts or opinions on Throne of Glass or anything I said about Throne of Glass, then go ahead and leave it in the comments below. I would love to have a conversation with you guys about this book. And I just want you guys to know that I don't hate this book. I do not hate Sarah J Maas. I don't hate her fans. I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed getting to reread it. I enjoyed reading it the first time. So, I mean, I'm right there with you. I totally get it. I understand why people love this book. But I just wanted to kind of, you know, give you my thoughts on my reread. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. And go ahead and follow all of my social media links and friend me on Goodreads. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.